Hello, my name is Guangyu Gao, a scholar who studies general methodology. I will use more than 100 images to illustrate critique of pure reason. When I wrote general methodology, there were 4 philosophical methods in it, and I bought some philosophical books, including Critique of Pure Reason. I read it several times and found this book valuable, so I analyzed and illustrated it using general methodology, which took me 5 months of spare time. Critique of Pure Reason is too difficult to understand. Just as on the scales, the weight of ability is not enough to match the weight of this book. I provide the general methodology to resolve these contradictions, so I wrote 100 pictures diagram critique of pure reason. That is, to add the weight of general methodology to the weighing pan of ability, so that it is sufficient to match the weight of this book. The book is divided into 11 chapters to explain critique of pure reason. Chapter 1, Kant and the status and influence of critique of pure reason. Immanuel Kant, philosopher, writer, founder of German classical rationalist philosophy, is represented by 3 criticisms. Kant's life can be summed up in 3 words: reading, teaching, and writing. He has been living a monotonous life as a scholar, deep into simplicity, and has never set foot in his hometown of Königsberg in his life. Kant's daily life is very regular, and neighbors will even compare his watch with the time he goes out for a walk. He lived an unmarried life, was small in stature, and wrote extensively. Kant was a dwarf among men, but a philosophical giant. Among them, Critique of Pure Reason is Kant's most famous masterpiece. Many articles and books mistake Jacobi's portrait for Kant's. On the list of the world's top 10 philosophers, Kant ranks 7th. Among the top 10 thinkers in the world, Kant ranks 8th. Someone made a visual network of philosophers' relationships and influence, and the larger the nodes, the greater the influence represented. The central hub is naturally the great philosophers such as Kant, Hegel, Nietzsche, and Marx. In a picture of some of the philosophers influenced by Kant, it includes Nietzsche, Marx, Engels, Heidegger, Derrida, Foucault, Badiou, Adorno, and Horkheimer. The Japanese philosopher Abe Noziai said, "Kantian philosophy is like a reservoir into which all the water before flows and from which all the water after flows." The reservoir analogy aptly describes Kant's collection of philosophical masterpieces as well as his far-reaching influence. The Russian literary theorist Galasov said, "On the path of philosophy, any thinker must cross a bridge, and that bridge is Kant." Critique of Pure Reason has a huge influence, ranking 2nd among the world's top 10 philosophical books. Critique of Pure Reason was named one of the 20 most influential academic books by the UK's Academic Book Week. Chapter 2, Critique of Pure Reason and General Methodology. Some people say that philosophical research has 3 major directions, including what, that is ontology, why, that is epistemology, and how, that is methodology. The 3 directions correspond to the 2 W1H. If from this point of view, Critique of Pure Reason is the study of epistemology, then my general methodology is the study of methodology. There are 4 philosophical methods in the general methodology: splitting, analogy, association, and abduction, and these 4 methods can be linked through Kant, and Kant's analogy of reservoir is really worthy of the name. The deductive reasoning of rationalism, the inductive reasoning of empiricism, and the abductive reasoning of Peirce are known as the world's 3 major reasoning, which correspond to 2W1H, and 2W1H corresponds to the 3 major directions of philosophical research. In addition to the 4 philosophical methods, there are 2 methods of generalized momentum theorem and systems thinking, as well as the corresponding graphical method of each method, and I will use the general methodology to analyze and explain Critique of Pure Reason from both thinking and diagramming. Chapter 3, Background to Critique of Pure Reason. Kant was faced with 3 major problems: the crisis of reason, the loss of freedom, and the metaphysical dilemma. The inability of rationalists and empiricists to obtain true knowledge is a crisis of reason. If all fields obey Newtonian mechanics and follow the law of causality, do humans still have freedom? This corresponds to the loss of freedom. In the field of metaphysics, philosophers quarreled for thousands of years without leaving a single true knowledge, which corresponds to the metaphysical dilemma. Where does the knowledge come from? Rationalists believed that knowledge came from reason, and Descartes formulated the philosophical quote, "I think, therefore I am." The empiricists believed that knowledge came from experience, and Locke came up with the famous theory of tabula rasa. Rationalism went to an extreme in Leibniz, that is, dogmatism. The empiricists went to the extreme in Hume, that is, skepticism, which made it difficult for both factions to continue on their own path, like a wall blocking their way. Hume's skepticism is even more destructive, arguing that the law of causality does not exist, and Hume drives the skepticism excavator to hollow out the causal foundations of the rationalist and empirical mansions. Hume used the famous case of the sun and stone to refute cause and effect. The sun is blazing, the stone is hot, we only see the sun blaze and then feel the stone hot, we don't see the cause in the sun blaze, we see the result in the stone hot, so we can't even say that the sun heats the stone. Hume's denial that effect necessarily follows cause destroys the inevitability of causation. We can also use the contrastive learning method in World's Top 10 Learning Methods to analyze rationalism and empiricism. Chapter 4: The Logical Structure of Critique of Pure Reason. What are the common reasons for the failure of the rationalists and the empiricists? This requires a generalization of their common ground. Both factions believe that knowledge meets the object, which is why they have reached a dead end. So Kant reversed this traditional epistemology and proposed a new epistemology in which objects correspond to knowledge. Faced with the problem of the incompatibility of cause and effect and freedom, Kant thought of solving it by demarcation, that is, if one mountain does not allow two tigers, then it is divided into two mountains. Kant divides objects into thing in itself and phenomena, which are produced by thing in itself stimulating man's cognitive ability. Phenomena correspond to cause and effect, and thing in itself correspond to freedom. Then the phenomenon corresponds to theoretical reason, and Kant answers with Critique of Pure Reason, which talks about cognitive ability to seek truth, and the theme is synthetic a priori judgment. The thing in itself corresponds to practical reason, and Kant answers with the Critique of Practical Reason, which emphasizes the desire for ability to seek goodness, and the theme is moral law and supreme goodness. The bridge between theoretical reason and practical reason is Critique of Judgment, which talks about judgment ability to seek beauty, and the theme is aesthetics and teleology. The three criticisms are also about truth, goodness, and beauty. Critique of Pure Reason is about what people can know, Critique of Practical Reason is about what people should do, and Critique of Judgment is about what people can expect. This is the logic of Kant's three criticisms. The theme of Critique of Pure Reason is, how is metaphysics possible? So, what is metaphysics? More than 200 years after Aristotle's death, Andronico compiled Aristotle's works on the nature of things, the soul, freedom of will and other objects other than the study of objects other than experience, ranking them after the book Physics that studies the specific form of things, and named it metaphysics. The prefix meta has the meaning of after, transcendence, and foundation. The Chinese translation of metaphysics comes from the Japanese philosopher Tetsujiro Inoue. Both Tao and metaphysics study the invisible. Critique of Pure Reason is divided into three parts: pure, reason and critique. Critique of Pure Reason refers to a thorough investigation of transcendental sensibility, understanding, and reason. Reason in a broad sense includes understanding and reason. Reason in a broader sense also includes sensibility. The most difficult and complex thing in Critique of Pure Reason is the overall logic of the book, and mastering this overall logic is equivalent to grasping the main trunk of the tree, and other branches and leaves will be solved. The thing in itself stimulates the sensibility to produce sensible intuition, which is attributed to the pattern by judgment, and then produces knowledge through the processing of understanding category, and knowledge becomes systematic knowledge through rational integration. Critique of pure reason is structurally divided into transcendental doctrine of elements and transcendental doctrine of method, and then transcendental doctrine of elements is divided into transcendental aesthetic and transcendental logic, and transcendental logic is divided into transcendental analytic and transcendental dialectic. The four themes of critique of pure reason correspond to sensibility, understanding, negative reason, and positive reason. Chapter 5: The Split of the World. If a whole is difficult to handle, then we can split it and break it individually. For example, cutting watermelons in life, dispersing enemy forces in military science, and then breaking them individually. From the perspective of whether the world is knowable, the philosophical world can be divided into two groups. One group believes that the world is knowable, such as Hegel and Marx. One group believes that the world is unknowable, such as Hume and Kant. Kant divided the world into two parts according to whether objects are sensibly intuitable or not. Sensible intuition is that which can be directly sensed by human senses. One part is not sensible, such as God, soul, and freedom, which are the objects of metaphysical study. The other part is sensible, such as objects that appear as apples, cats, rocks, etc. It is important to note that things in itself are unknowable, but we can know that they stimulate us and produce appearances. Kant's split is somewhat similar to Aristotle's split, Kant's thing in itself and metaphysics, basically corresponding to Aristotle's physics and metaphysics. Kant splits the object of knowledge into two kinds of sensible thing in itself and insensible thing in itself, and then splits the human ability to know the object into sensibility, understanding, and reason. A flowchart can be split in the order of the objects of human cognition. Chapter 6: Thing in Itself, Existence Unknowable. What is a thing in itself? If you think that the world is knowable and see apples, the apple is the apple itself. Kant believed that the world was unknowable and that the apple seen was just the appearance of thing in itself. We can also understand from Kant's glasses. If you wear purple glasses, then what you see will also bring purple, which distorts our perception. There are several kinds of agnostic, and what Kant said about unknowability is the limitation of our ability, and it is impossible to break through it in the future. The type of cone cells determines the basic colors that living things can see. Humans have three types of cone cells, red, green and blue, so our vision is a trichromatic system. Dogs have only two types of cone cells and can see the blue and yellow dichromatic system. The number of human cone cells is between that of dogs and peacock mantis shrimp, so who sees the real world? It is more likely that dogs, humans, and peacock mantis shrimp see a world that is not the real world, but only the world that our visual abilities have processed. Experience comes with human beings, and experience obeys the law of cause and effect. The thing in itself is unknowable, and does not know whether it obeys the law of cause and effect. In previous epistemology, it was believed that knowledge conforms to the object is the benchmark, and knowledge changes itself around the object so that knowledge conforms to the object. Kant reversed it, proposing that the object conforms to knowledge and that knowledge is the benchmark, which is Kant's Copernican revolution. Both Kant and Copernicus reversed the original benchmark, and many problems in the world are actually problems of reference, that is, the problem of the frame of reference. Chapter 7: Sensibility, Sensory Capacity. What is sensibility? Critique of Pure Reason writes, the capacity for receiving representations through the mode in which we are affected by objects, is called sensibility. Sensibility produces appearances, which requires two conditions: one is to be stimulated by an external object, and the other is to respond appropriately to the stimulated object. Human external senses include eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body, which can produce the sensation of color, sound, fragrance, taste and touch. For example, the thing in itself stimulates our senses, and our senses produce various appearances: round, red, silent, a little fragrant, sweet and sour, a little hard. These are the appearances produced by the thing in itself stimulating us, and these appearances together are miscellaneous appearances. The intuitive simple comprehension is direct and does not require intermediaries. Sensible material plus sensible form equals sensible intuitive. What are materials and form? The material form theory comes from Aristotle's for causes theory. Take the example of building a house. Bricks, cement and windows are the material cause of the house. The construction workers are the motivating cause of the house. The form cause is the unique structure of the house, such as a two-room house. The purpose cause is the purpose of the house, such as a wedding house. Kant's material is similar to Aristotle's material cause, and the form is similar to Aristotle's formal cause. Kant believed that sensible materials are composed of two forms: sensory materials, time and space. Understanding materials are composed of the sensible material and the understanding category. We can put the outer senses, the outer sensory form space and the inner sense form time into a diagram: space represented by a cube, time represented by a clock. Thoughts without content are empty, intuitions without concepts are blind. For this we can split using the Boston matrix. Sensible intuition and understanding category work together to produce knowledge. Intuitiveness has content, thinking has concepts, and knowledge is generated. Understanding and sensibility are multiplied relationships, and both are indispensable. Chapter 8: Understanding, Processing Capacity. Knowledge acts on sensible intuition to produce judgment. Understanding needs to act on sensible intuition with the intermediary of a schema. The form of understanding is category, knowledge is judgment, real knowledge is synthetic a priori judgment. Man legislates for nature. This is a famous quote from Critique of Pure Reason, and I analogize human cognitive faculties with court judgments, so as to reduce the difficulty of understanding them. The defendant is the thing in itself, which is existent but unknowable, which stimulates the plaintiff's sensibility, which reacts and presents to the judge in court the sins of the thing in itself committed against its five senses. The judge is the judgment, which sentences the object according to the code of understanding, that is, the human's understanding category legislates for nature, and this nature is the thing in itself. The clerk is the reason, which cannot produce judgment, but it can organize the case file into a systematic case file. We can also use bridge map to clearly illustrate these analogies. Understanding makes judgments according to categories, just as judges make judgments according to the code. What is understanding? The ability to think about sensible intuitive objects is understanding. Understanding is a processing ability that processes sensible materials into knowledge through categories. The understanding category is like the mold of a cookie, the sensible material is like the pastry, and the different shapes of the cookies are like knowledge, and the shape of these cookies can only be the shape of the mold. You can also use the analogy of the production process. Thing in itself is like the raw material, the sensibility is like the quality inspector, who records the raw material truthfully. Understanding is like a production worker, who makes the raw material into finished products. Reason is like a packer, he organizes and packs finished products, but does not produce finished products. What are a priori, transcendental and transcendent? Previously, according to whether the object can be sensually intuited or not, it can be divided into two parts: the thing in itself that can be sensually intuited and the thing in itself that cannot be sensually intuited. Split according to experience and beyond experience, it can be divided into empirical and transcendent parts, and both the sensible intuitable thing in itself and metaphysics belong to transcendent. The sensible intuitive thing in itself can produce experience through transcendental sensibility and transcendental understanding, while the object of metaphysics cannot produce experience through transcendental sensibility and transcendental understanding. The transcendental is prior to and independent of experience. The a priori includes the transcendental, a posterior includes the experience. Transcendental and experience are related, and transcendental is the condition that produces experience. We can compare the transcendental to the tooth disc of a bicycle, which provides the power, just as the transcendental is the condition for the production of experience. The small wheel on experience is the frisbee, and the frisbee is what drives the vehicle of experience forward, and the tooth disc drives the frisbee, which in turn drives experience, just as the transcendental drives and generates experience. What is synthetic a priori judgment? The role of understanding is to produce concepts and make judgments. Kant believed that any knowledge is a judgment, and judgment can be divided into analytic judgment and synthetic judgment according to whether the subject contains a predicate. The red flowers are red. This is an analytic judgment. The flower is red, which is a synthetic judgment. Kant is a philosopher. In this sentence, Kant is the subject, the philosopher is the predicate, and is the copula, which is used to connect the subject and the predicate. The knowledge of analytic judgment is universal necessity, but it cannot increase knowledge. The knowledge of synthetic judgment increases knowledge, but it is not universal necessity. We can split universal necessity, with universal indicating that it applies broadly and necessary indicating that it must occur. Is there a kind of knowledge that both increases knowledge and is universal necessity? We can use the Boston matrix to split Kant's logic, and out of the four combinations, only synthetic a priori judgment is both universal necessity and increases knowledge, which is the real knowledge that Kant is looking for. What are judgment table and category table? The concept of category was first introduced to philosophy by Aristotle, who found 10 of the most universal concepts. Kant's critique inherited Aristotle's judgment table and made substantial adjustments and modifications, and also used the rule of trichotomy, which has the meaning of dialectic positive, negative, and conforming. Kant's judgment table is obtained through critical inheritance and trichotomy, and the judgment quantity has both universal and single terms, while the special name is obtained by trichotomy. Judgment is the form of S is P universal, all S is P. For example, all swans are white. Kant introduced his category table one-on-one through his own improved judgment table. We can also represent the relationship between Kant's judgment table and the category table on a diagram. We can use an example to explain Kant's category table. My coffee cup is on that table. My corresponds to the relation category, which indicates the relation between me and the cup. My coffee cup corresponds to the quantity category, which refers to a cup, which corresponds to totality. Coffee cup corresponds to the quality category, which refers to reality. On that table corresponds to the modality category, which refers to existence, indicating the existence of the cup. Kant's judgment table and category table, using the trivium, is the prototype of the dialectical method of positive, negative, and combined. The positive, negative, and combined of Hegel's dialectical method was influenced by Kant, and Hegel in turn influenced Marx. We can also analyze the positive, negative, and combined from the perspective of the generalized momentum theorem. The combined external force determines the result. The combined external force is equal to the power minus the resistance. The power is the positive topic, the resistance is the negative topic, and the joint external force is the combined topic. Dialectics has three major laws, namely, law of unity of opposites, law of mutual change of quality and quantity, and law of negation of negation. We can also use the general momentum theorem to explain them. Power and resistance are opposites, and power and resistance are unified into a combined force. Combined force act on quality to produce new quantity and quality, that is, law of mutual change of quality and quantity. Resistance is the negation of power, and the combined force is the negation of resistance, that is, law of negation of negation. Dialectics has 5 pairs of categories, and 3 pairs can be found in Kant's category table. The first 2 groups of Kant's category table are mathematical and the last 2 are mechanical, of which the category of relations is the most important. The three categories of relations include entity, causality, and community, with entity corresponding to Newton's law of inertia, causality corresponding to the law of acceleration, and community corresponding to the law of interaction. We can also use Kant's category to analyze the general momentum theorem. Quantity in corresponding to quantity category, mass m corresponding to quality category, F alpha T and NMV represent cause and effect, corresponding to relation category. The formula of generalized momentum theorem is necessary. The left cause necessarily leads to the right effect, corresponding to modality category. There is a famous saying in the Critique of Pure Reason: two things fill me with constantly increasing admiration and awe, the longer and more earnestly I reflect on them, the starry heavens without and the moral law within. These two sentences can connect Newton, Rousseau, and Kant. Sensibility and understanding are not qualitative, which requires an intermediary, and this mediation is a time-based schema. Sensibility is self-stimulated by objects, providing five senses based on time and space, that is, sensible intuition. Judgment judges these sensible intuitions, distinguishes which miscellaneous should take which time-based bridge, and then passes through the understanding category to produce knowledge. For example, if this person sees that 100 swans are white, then the judgment will make this visual sense take the bridge of the schema type of quantity, and then after the totality of the sphere of knowledge, get the knowledge that all swans are white. Everything happens for a reason. The a priori pure form of time is taken into the succession of relational schema through the judgment, and then through the causality and dependence of the sphere of knowledge, it produces everything happens for a reason. This process has no involvement of external senses, only the pure form of time, and does not include experience, so it is a pure synthetic a priori judgment. The apple falling to the ground is caused by gravity. This apple is acquired, because it is seen by the eye, and then space is needed to store this apple, and there is a temporal sequence. Therefore, the three types of eyes, space, and time are subsumed into the succession of relational schema by judgment, and then through the causality and dependence of the category of knowledge, the apple falls to the ground because of gravity. This is a specific synthetic a priori judgment. A little boy living on a farm wakes up every day to the crowing of chickens, and then he finds out that the sky dawns, so the boy makes the judgment that the crowing of chickens is the reason for the dawn. The quality of judgment depends on judgment. The judgment is a peculiar talent, which does not, and cannot require tuition, but only exercise. Kant said that examples are a walker of judgment, and with the practice of examples, judgment can be increased. The four categories can produce different understanding principles that can guide judgment in discernment. Chapter 9, Reason, Integration Capacity. Reason acts on knowledge, reasoning about knowledge, thus becoming systematic knowledge. Reason does not produce knowledge. Reason is the capacity of principle, reducing a great deal of understanding knowledge to a minimum of principles. There are three relations in Kant's judgment table, and three relations can give three forms of reasoning. We can also explain Critique of Pure Reason on the theme of judgment. Deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, and abductive reasoning, which are types of reasoning, categorical reasoning, hypothetical reasoning, and disjunctive reasoning are forms of reasoning. Kant called antitribulational reasoning, that is, reasoning from backward to forward, the method of retrospective reasoning. Kant wants to reason forward until he finds a major premise that does not require any premise, the unconditioned, which Kant calls the idea. Reason has three kinds of reasoning, and using the method of forward inference yields three transcendental ideas: the soul, the universe, and God. Applying the understanding category to the soul, the universe, God, produces transcendental illusion. The soul is an sensual intuitive thing in itself, so it cannot stimulate sensibility to produce appearances, and therefore cannot use understanding category to deal with it, and the fallacious reasoning of the four souls is produced by using categories for processing. The universe as a whole cannot be intuited sensually and cannot be processed using the categories, and the four sets of antinomy are also generated using the categories. The antinomy include positive topic and reverse topic, which can be represented by two villains in white and black, and back reversal is to force in the opposite direction, which can be expressed by tug-of-war between two people. God is also incapable of sensible intuition and cannot be dealt with using categories. The three ideals of God's existence also arise from the wrong use of categories. Kant's ideas come from Plato, where ideas are the origin of things and sensible things are subsumptions and imitations of ideas. Kant's ideas are of three kinds: the soul, the universe, and God, and the application of categories to these three produces pseudo-knowledge. Plato divided the world into the world of ideas and the world of phenomena. The apple of reality is the subsistence of the apple of ideas, and the apple of reality is a copy of the apple of ideas. Partition emphasizes the affiliation of individual things to ideas, and imitation emphasizes their similarity. Plato divided ideas into 6 layers, the lowest of which was the idea of natural objects, such as the idea of stones and apples. The highest level is goodness, and it is also the ultimate goal. Plato uses the cave analogy to explain the theory of ideas, where the prisoner can only see the shadow on the wall of the cave, because he cannot turn around and believes that the shadow is real, while in fact the physical object behind it is real. Phenomena in Plato's theory are imitations of ideas, just as shadows are projections of physical objects in cave metaphors. Plato divided the world into ideas and phenomenal worlds, and both can be known. Kant divided the world into 2 divisions, the first dividing itself into the thing in itself and the phenomenal worlds, and the second dividing thing in itself. The thing in itself can be sensible intuition in order to stimulate the production of phenomena, that is, knowledge. The thing in itself is unknowable, and the phenomenon can be known. The unsensible thing in itself can only produce pseudo-knowledge, which is an illusion. Chapter 10: Transcendental Doctrine of Method. Transcendental doctrine of method is about the discipline of pure reason, canon, architectonic and history, where the discipline is divided into 4 sections, including discipline of pure reason in the sphere of dogmatism, polemics, hypothesis and relation to proofs. Abductive reasoning can be divided into 4 steps: producing surprising facts, generating hypotheses based on facts, deducing inferences based on hypotheses, and verifying inferences to exclude the impossible. And we can also correspond the 4 types of discipline and abductive reasoning, and polemics corresponds to surprising facts, hypothesis corresponds to reducibility, dogmatism corresponds to deduction, relation to proofs corresponds to verification. How is Hume's skepticism resolved? The sun is blazing, the stone is hot, this is what we see, but Hume said that we can't see the sun leading to stone hot, that is, we can't see the law of cause and effect. Kant's answer is that human knowledge is composed of sensible ability and understanding ability, and we cannot see the causal law in the sensible ability, but the causal law comes from our understanding, that is, the causal and dependent properties in the relational category, which is based on the succession of time, and the causal law is added by us humans. Does knowledge come from reason or experience? Kant believed that knowledge derives from the sensibility of empiricists and the rational faculties of rationalism, and Kant's reason here refers to the understanding in generalized reason. That is what Kant famously said: thoughts without content are empty, intuitions without concepts are blind. Is metaphysics possible? Traditional metaphysical objects cannot be sensible intuition, so they cannot produce knowledge. But the 3 ideas of metaphysical soul, universe and God are of great use in practical reason, and they correspond to the 3 major suspensions of moral metaphysics and play a basic role. Chapter 11: 3 Thinking Directions to Think About Critique of Pure Reason. Classical mechanics, relativity, and quantum mechanics are the 3 monuments of logical thinking, representing the depth of human intelligence. Cybernetics, information theory, and systems theory are the 3 monuments of lateral thinking, representing the breadth of human thinking. So are Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, Critique of Practical Reason, and Critique of Judgment 3 monuments of critical thinking, representing the height of human thinking. We can also use logical thinking to deepen critique of pure reason. For example, if we use technology to add an extrasensory that can access the infrared light of objects, then human sensible ability can be greatly enhanced. We can also use critical thinking to criticize critique of pure reason. So why are there necessarily three judgment relationships in the judgment table? Why can the relationship of judgment be introduced into three categories? Why can three kinds of reasoning lead to three transcendental ideas? We can also use lateral thinking to associate critique of pure reason. The three kinds of Kantian relational categories and Newton's three laws correspond one-to-one, where causality and subordination correspond to the law of acceleration, which is the law of causality. And my generalized momentum theorem F alpha t equals nmv is derived from the law of acceleration, which is also the law of causality, which produces the same effect as Kant's causal category. Diagrams in Kant's schema can also be used for lateral associative and critical thinking. Britain and Europa compete in various ways, and we can associate many cases horizontally. All three representatives of the empiricists are British, while all three representatives of the rationalists are from continental European countries. Newton in England and Leibniz in continental Europe had a dispute over the invention of calculus. Critique of pure reason not only allowed me to perfect critical thinking among the three thinking directions, it also connects the four philosophical methods of splitting, analogy, association and abduction. It also allowed me to link the three thinking directions more closely to the general methodology, and the causal laws in the categories could be linked and analyzed with the generalized momentum theorem, both of which are based on time and are about causal laws. Schopenhauer said, "He who has not mastered the Kantian philosophy, whatever else he may have studied, is, as it were, in a state of innocence, that is to say, he remains in the grasp of that natural and childish realism in which we are all born, and which fits us for everything possible, with the single exception of philosophy." Such a man then stands to the man who knows the Kantian philosophy as a minor to a man of full age.